Hello everyone, here is Tatiana Bazzichelli, the director of the Disruption Network Club, and I'm very glad to introduce our Disruptive Friday number 31, Art as Investigation and Deconstruction of Carceral Spaces, and the title is Opening Prisons. I'm also very happy to introduce our speakers today. I am here with Sean Vegezzi, he's a visual artist and researcher, and also Fiamma Montezemolo, artist and anthropologist. Behind the scene, also I want to welcome Özlem Kaya, that is doing the production for the Disruption Network Club, and our great streaming service, Boiling Head Media. I want to remind everyone that also we have a chat that is on our website, so you are really welcome to go there and start asking questions to our speakers, especially if you are following us on YouTube. Just go on our website, disruptionlab.org/Fridays, and you will find the chat there. It's very important to say that this Disruptive Friday is the start of a project that is called Smart Prisons, Tracking, Monitoring and Control. This project is funded by Allianz Kulturstiftung and is going on until June 2023. Important also to say that this is the first episode of a series that will lead to our conference, also Smart Prison, that will be at the Kunstquartier Bethanien between March 24 and 26. And at this conference, we will investigate the recent developments in the creation of prisons and detention centers, and also the technical and ethical implication of tracking, monitoring, and control. So it's very important that we start today this discussion also because the speakers that we have with us, Fiamma Montezemolo and Sean Vegezzi, will also be part of our conference. And especially, I'm very happy to introduce the fact that Sean Vegezzi will create an artistic production with the Disruption Network Club that will also last until June 2023. And also he will be the keynote at our conference, Smart Prisons. So I want to start with Sean, that will have a very interesting presentation, also will show a video. And I would say also that this kind of presentation wants to give you a hint of what he will speak at our conference. And in a sense, is the start of the project together. So welcome both of you, and also very looking forward to see this project develop, Sean. So Sean is a New York-based artist and researcher. He studies spatial politics effect on the individuals, blending personal experience with narrative of autonomy, privacy, and security. And the focus of his presentation today, and also his investigation that he will carry on in these months with the Disruption Network Club, is the Vernon C. Bain Center, that is a floating detention facility in New York. We will also see through his presentation an extract of the film Edgelands, VCBC, that he made in collaboration with Laura Poitras and also the grassroots organization Take Back the Bronx. So, Sean, I leave to you now the stage, our virtual stage, and very happy to welcome you at the Disruption Network Club.
Thank you, Tatiana. Thanks for having me. I wanted to start off by saying that so far in 2022, 18 people have passed away in Rikers Island this year. The Department of Corrections is the body that oversees all of the carceral spaces in New York City, which I thought would be important to mention. I'm going to continue to refer to them throughout the presentation as the DOC, Department of Corrections. Elected officials in New York City, Department of Corrections, and the Department of Corrections Labor Union, which is made up of actual prison staff. They're called COBA. They continue to let this public health crisis continue in New York City without doing anything about it. And I thought that that would be first and most important thing to mention. And my personal connection to this facility, to VCBC, is that a family member of mine was almost transferred to the facility from Rikers Island. And I have been continuing to research the facility since this happened. And I also think it's important to acknowledge that my personal connection to the facility, being a white person, is really not the same as the experience that Black and Latinx people, who are the main people who are locked up in these facilities, face. It's a much more embodied, systemic issue when you are a non-white person, and the system is designed to, extinguish and extract from non-white life. And with that said, the last thing I'd like to say before beginning is, if anyone, not even if anyone, I would strongly encourage you to get in touch with the grassroots organization that I work with, Take Back the Bronx. I would strongly encourage you to look at their Instagram and their Twitters, which we'll post in the chat, and definitely make financial contributions if you can, because the work that they do is really important, and they're really the only grassroots organization, in my opinion, that's doing really important work surrounding the closure of Rikers and the closure of this facility. And now I'll go on to the slides. So the use of seagoing vessels as slave transport in carceral spaces has a very long tenure worldwide. And I think it would be really helpful to share a few definitions before I show the video that I made in collaboration with Laura Poitras and Take Back the Bronx. Slave ships, I'm sure many people are familiar with the term, but those explicitly refer to vessels that forcibly carried Africans to America from 1440 to 1870. Convict ships were vessels that colonial superpowers used to carry out penal transportation to colonies for detention and labor. Prison ships were constructed historically as overfill measures for prisons, primarily in England, is I think where the most famous examples lay within. And they retained their seagoing capability, so they retained their sails, their masts, their rudders, everything that you need to sail a ship, but became detention spaces. I'll go to the next slide, which shows prison hulks. This slide shows many hulks on the left side of the frame and also the right side of the frame next to normal seafaring vessels with sails. And you can see that all of those structures on the left do not have any sails up. And prison hulks are decommissioned ships, usually warships or cargo ships, but primarily warships that were retrofitted with prison architecture after the fact. And these were much more prominent than any prison ships that I previously mentioned. It's also important to mention that prison hulks were not just run by the government. They became essentially like a private enterprise in England. Last two definitions I thought would be helpful to share are POW ships, which over time have been called many different things depending on the conflict they've been associated with. In the Russian Civil War, these POW ships that hold prisoners of war were called death barges. And in World War II, when Japan was utilizing them, America called them hell ships. And the U.S. has recently used their Navy fleets to detain suspected Al-Qaeda and Taliban members in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And lastly, the last definition I thought of, which refer to ships used in the British-led Acadian deportation in what's now known as the Canadian Maritime Province areas, so Nova Scotia, etc., and Navy transport vessels that Great Britain used to send back Jewish people trying to enter Palestine in 1947. And now we can begin the film.
Emergency transmission. Be advised. I have a fire condition. 3CA. Need a supervisor to this area now.
Five on in the affected area at this time. It appears to be a smoke condition. I just need assistance with evacuating the area.
I'm in the affected area. Appears to be a smoke condition. Requesting for a fire team. I'm in the process of evacuating all the individuals in the area. Is that a copy? So I got a medical emergency in 3C. Medical emergency. I'm gonna need a gurney. Up in 3C. 5 to Central. Notify COD for me and make contact with FDNY. This is not a drill.
Be advised, MA is refusing to be assisted to feed in a journey.
Escort 2, fire response 2 to 5, be advised. I'm conducting an assessment now. Got medical staff on site. I'm conducting a visual. I'm conducting a visual of the cells at this time, sir.
Subject MA is being placed on a gurney, transported to the clinic at this time. He has been secured on the gurney.
Be advised, be advised to all areas. There is to be absolutely no movement within the command at this time. Everything is shut down. There is no movement in this command until further notice. All units, we have a 10-11 in progress, K. Let's go. Intake staff, get in formation, K. I need somebody to get the elevator. Let's go. C5 to the probe supervisor.
Oh, sir.
Be advised, ensure you are in compliance with the distance with deploying gas, K. If that inmate fails to comply with your orders, you have to deploy gas to gain compliance.
That's a copy, sir. I have one on the bridge that's secured. Stand by for further assessment.
Five to all control posts, all areas, you have to lock your doors at this time. We're in alarm status, remain off the air unless it's an emergency transmission case. All units stand by. Fire Central, conduct a sweep of the vessel via Gentex.
Pro to 5, please be advised. Both individuals secured in pin 7 and pin 13.
That is a copy, K. That is a copy. Leave those inmates in restraints. Report to me. Fire Central, make notification to all control posts. Lock their doors. There is to be no further movement in the command at this time. I need photos of the first inmate that is en route to you. I need photos forthwith, please.
One more pen intake.
Be advised, all the pins are full. We are trying to find space. Stand by with that.
Bravo 5, be advised, all staff is accounted for. Second phase, secure the housing area. Stand by on night. Be advised, if you know the non-compliant at this time, requesting assistance.
I need you all to please report with escorting these inmates into the units, okay? And remind these inmates we run this vessel.
So, in case that's confusing for anyone, what the video is showing is intercepted radio transmissions from the Vernon C. Bain, which is the floating detention facility, which is a part of the Rikers Island jail complex in New York. All of those intercepts were recorded from April 2021 forward, and they show this kind of constant compounding abuse against inmates The full film is 11 minutes long. If anyone was interested in seeing it, you might be able to share a screen or link after the fact. But I thought I'd continue on to the next slides. I just want to start with a disclaimer for this. This is a bit confusing, so if you can see the image in full screen, you'll note that this image says that the facility behind this gentleman, who's a warden of Rikers Island at the time, is named the Vernon C. Bain. When this first experimental facility that you see in this image was closed down, the name Vernon C. Bain was given to the facility that you just saw. Just wanted to make that clear. From 1985 onward, is an important time to examine because that's when the city began experimenting with the creation of this concept of detaining people on the water in floating facilities. This period of time from 1985 forward in New York City is commonly referred to as the crack era, which is when crack cocaine was proliferated through America and really had a very devastating effect in New York City. And the city, rather than tackling this issue through a public health intervention, decides that it's going to fill its carceral spaces to the brim, till there's no more space left. And at the same time, that's influenced by neoliberalism, and neoliberalism at this time is really kind of punching what's left of decimated social welfare services from the 1970s forward. And the city begins by converting a former public transport facility, which you see in this slide, which is a Staten Island ferry, so a ferry that's free to the city of New York to use for transportation, always has been free versus paid transportation. And it converts these ferries into what they call floating dormitories. So I'm not sure if the city at this point is trying to distance itself from the history of slave ships and whatnot, or if it's amnesiac or something, or trying to avoid nostalgia, but it creates these new terms for these facilities called floating dorms. And they hold about 167 people each, and they cost, adjusted for inflation, $18 million each at the time. And I'm going to go to the next slide. So after these facilities kind of reach capacity, the city decides that this method of detaining people is really effective and wants to build more. And to build more, what they do is they purchase two decommissioned troop carriers from the British government. These troop carriers were previously used in the Falklands Island War to hold troops in the Falklands Islands War. And you can see in the slide, towards the middle of the image, two tugboats bringing in a rather large block-like geometric form to the East River in New York City. And these facilities hold 400 detainees, and they each cost approximately $52 million, adjusted for inflation. And they call these facilities floating, they call them prison barges. And these spaces that were originally designed for troops to live in have to be redesigned for prisoners. So spaces that were once meant to kind of boost the morale of soldiers are then deconstructed, and they essentially deny morale. When the Koch administration, which was the administration that was in office at the time of the construction of these facilities, they were questioned about whether or not prisoners would get seasick at this time. They were told, we'll give them Dramamine. So Dramamine is an anti-nausea medication, and so that was the Koch administration's response to critics of this program, that give them Dramamine. These two facilities were closed down through mounting community opposition, and the federal government actually intervened as well, and decided that the mooring of these facilities to New York City was illegal, and so they were sent away. And at the same time, in 1989, New York City places an order for the Vernon C. Bain Center, and they cannot back out of that contract. So these facilities are becoming controversial. They're not allowed by community members. They're not allowed by the federal government. However, the city secures a piece of land and hopes to kind of, cheat the failures of the previous facilities. And it moors this facility, the Vernon C. Bain Center, in the South Bronx. The structure was constructed in Avondale, by a company named Avondale in Louisiana, and it arrives late and over budget into the city of New York in 1992. I don't know if I have time to go through all of this, unfortunately, but I did want to share. I don't. So I just thought I would say that this is the first facility of its kind in the world and still holds the record. It is the only floating detention facility that exists. The only facility built from the ground up to be a prison. And before I end, that term floating detention facility was another term created by the city of New York to, again, distance itself from the history of slave ships, prison hulks, etc. Well, time went fast, but had more to say.
I think you are breaking up. I don't know if it's my problem or Özlem, is the connection all right? Okay, I hope it's fine. Yeah, okay, good. Yes, thank you. So I didn't want to interrupt the last part. So you want to conclude just the sentence that we were saying before me interrupting?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think it would be really helpful. So I don't have time to share all the statistics about the facility, but this facility, the one statistic I thought I would share was, again, a fiscal figure that this was built at a cost of $311 million adjusted for inflation. So rather than investing in social welfare services, public health interventions, the city spends $311 million across 1989 to 1982 when this vessel was being constructed and arriving in New York. And by that time, the facility, prisons across New York had been largely depopulated. The crack epidemic the so-called crack epidemic had eased. Jail populations were decreasing, but the city decided that it was too late, given it had entered this financial agreement and went ahead with the construction and installment of this facility in general. And the very last thing I'd like to say is this facility, as you can see in this image here, Rikers Island is the big mass in the middle. And as you zoom closer in, you start seeing the emergence of this facility in the South Bronx. And the South Bronx has historically been the most neglected neighborhood in New York City, and the city drops this facility into the South Bronx, which, I mean, they have to know what they were doing by doing that. The message it sends to intimidate the community. And also they know that people in that neighborhood wouldn't be able to have the same kind of political organizing power that neighborhoods in Manhattan, where those original vessels were placed, would have to fight the existence of the facility.
Okay, thank you very much, Sean. Also, we will have time to discuss more in detail some aspect of your talk after the presentation of Fiamma, and of course also during our conference in March. Now I would like to pass it to Fiamma Montezemolo. She is an artist and an anthropologist, and is a scholar in border studies and professor in the Department of Cinema and Digital Media at the University of California, Davis. And in her work, she creates site-specific and interdisciplinary interventions that build on her long-term exposure to borderlands and border zone. So in this presentation, Fiamma Montezemolo will present two artistic projects that are also related to the discourse of prison spaces and how we conceptually could open up these prison spaces. That is why also we decided to call this Disruptive Friday opening prisons, because also that there is now a conceptual aspect through Fiamma to try to understand how we could open up this concept. And she will speak about the project Perucatti, that is about the Santo Stefano Islands prison in Italy, and also Exit Only, that relates to the Guantanamo prison. So Fiamma, I pass it to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sean, for your very interesting intervention. Thank you, Tatiana and the Disruptive Fridays for the invitation. And it struck to me the fact that while Sean was talking, we are talking about basically floating prisons in or both or island terms, because Sean is talking about both. I'm talking about islands, but there is always this element of insularity, which is really interesting. I just thought about it while Sean was talking. So this project you're seeing is called Project Perucatti. Is referring to the prison that is situated on the Santo Stefano Island, which is basically in front, between Rome and Naples, in the water in front, and close to the Ventotene Island that maybe some of you visited because it's a very touristic and wonderful island. The Santo Stefano prison was built in 1795, and it's has been very active since then. And it was built because Ferdinando delle Due Sicilie asked architect Francesco Carpi to design a prison strictly for this island. No, the island is very small, and the prison is basically the only example in Italy of a prison built with an Enlightenment concept, which come from obviously Jeremy Bentham, that designed the idea of the panopticon. So it's very important because basically the concept of the panopticon, as many of us know from Foucault, is that you have cells all around, as you can see in the picture that you have in front of you, that is the model I designed, and I built with José Parral, an architect. And basically the idea of the prison is that all around you have the cell, and in the center you have the power. So you have the guard or the priest, the authoritative figure that is going to check and control all the cells. From the cells, you can just see the center. From the center, you can see all the cells. So there is let's say, an opposite idea of control. You cannot control if they're controlling you, because you cannot really know if in the central space there is someone in the guard space, let's say, but you can think there is. So you introject this idea of control yourself. You think that you are controlled anyway, not being able to verify if someone is in the central space. While from the guard point of view, you can have a view on all the prisoners at the same time. So that was the strong concept. The concept was that you had to basically regulate yourself, because you may be watched. So I was always stricken by this prison, and we decided to rebuild a model of it, and in the center, instead of placing I don't know if you see the images, because I see myself. Do you see? Is in the center, instead of placing the guard, what I did is to study all the diaries and the letters coming from prisoners that were very famous of the prison. Like, for example, there is Pertini, who has been an anti-fascist fighter and then became the president of Italy. There were like important prisoners, Settembrini, from the end of the 18th century until 1960, when the prison was completely closed. The title Perucatti is because there was an enlightened, very important director that in the 50s arrived to the prison and made it as a place that is converted from a place that was very, very punitive to a place that was much more open to reform. So he plays like the garden, the prisoners could play soccer with the island people that were in front. The kids, the guards could have the kids staying with their families there. They could be visited, and then they could have art recreation. So there were a lot of reforms. So it was very important to me to give a positive note to this project. So I collected the title comes from the Disperugati director, and the images that you see at the center of the panopticon are the ones that are dreamt, desired by the prisoners. So I collected through their writings what they would have liked to see instead of what they would see, and I went to photographs those elements. So, for example, they were talking about the nature, which is amazing, the sea, the sky, the kids that could play soccer, because before Perucati, nobody could basically come out from the cells. A lot of people died in these prisons because they were very tough to survive in. And so you can see this from a point of view of a cell. And it's like a sort of voyeuristic view at the center. And what you see are the images dreamt by the prisoners. And they're in loop. So now there should be. This is the loop that you would see if you were seen from the prison. At the moment, the prison is has been closed for many years, but at the moment is being rehabilitated, restructured, and it's going to become a cultural center. And it's very important because with Ventotene, which is really very, very close, Ventotene is famous for the Manifesto Ventotene, made by Spinelli, who basically is one of the first that thought of the European Union, that started the idea of the European Union. So the idea is to do a double center between Ventotene and Santo Stefano. Then the next project that I would like to present is still in an island, and let me see if I can get there. I cannot go there from the mini video loop. I don't know if Elizabeth can help to go. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah,
Thank
now
you.
we are there.
So basically, now you're there, yeah. So basically, the next project is another, of course, symbolic intervention. In 2012, with artist Ian Paul, he thought this project that is called the Guantanamo Bay Museum of Art and History. So we imagined that the Guantanamo prison would be closed in the Obama era especially, and that it would become a cultural center. So the idea was to create a center for cultural studies dedicated to Stuart Hall, in a collection for the museums, and we as artists would contribute with other places, with other pieces to the collection. There would be an artist residence. So we imagine an entire island, an entire prison becoming something else, again, like Progetto Perucatti. This is called Exit Only because I was in charge of designing the ticket for the new museum. And the ticket was a ticket that, as you can see here, was just to get out from the prison. You could get out from the prison once per year, the day in which the first two people left the Guantanamo prison, which took a very long time, as you know. And but you couldn't. You could access the museum anytime, but you could exit just one time per year. So to give a sense of how long and how difficult it was to leave Guantanamo. As we know, Guantanamo has been really in auge with Bush after the 2001 attacks, 2001. But it's still active. Has been active. Obama wanted to do some changes and close it, but he didn't make it. Donald Trump signed that it would be there forever, and finally Biden said that he would intervene, but there are still dozens of people there. And without trial, without rights, without representation, is an island that is basically outside of the United States, but at the same time is in their jurisdiction because it was a deal made during the Spanish-American War, and it was part of the deal to be autonomous for Cuba. So is still active, and we don't know if and ever is going to be closed. It doesn't look like. Time is finished, so I think we can just move to Tatiana. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiamma. I would like now to start a little round of questions among us and then open to the public. And I remind the people that there is a chat on our website, disruptionlab.org/Fridays. And if they have questions to you, they can directly ask, and then I will ask to you later. But so I would like to start with the first question to Sean, because I'm very interested, of course, in the technological aspect, and especially in relation to the Edge Lens video that you just showed. I would like to know how you use the drone technology to visualize the ship, and at the same time also how did you manage to intercept the radio communication? So if you could combine these two questions and tell us a bit more how did you get this information for the video?
Sure. As far as the drone imagery, I have to be careful just for legal reasons here, but if you think of this facility floating on water in the South Bronx, it's a very hard area to access, like physically. The South Bronx is very underserved by public transport, especially this particular area where the facility is placed, and it's heavily guarded. And so the only way in which you're going to gain access to the facility, so to speak, would be through the use of drones. What's complicating is the fact that this sits adjacent to LaGuardia Airport, it's the airport in New York City, and so the NYPD, the DOC, and a few other authoritative bodies in New York actively monitor drone flights by the company DJI, which is like the most popular drone company. And so in theory, if you were to do any kind of documentary, not saying I did this, but in theory, if you were to do any kind of documentary work surrounding these facilities, you would probably want to use drones that are not manufactured by DJI. I'm not encouraging anyone to do that, but I just do think that the NYPD, is only monitoring those DJI drones, and they kind of deserve to be challenged on that, in my opinion. So although it is our taxpayer money that will buy them more equipment to monitor other drones, I think, that cat and mouse, I welcome that cat and mouse dynamic. And as far as the radio intercepts, this isn't as much of a legal issue to talk about. New York City has not encrypted a lot of its radio chatter amongst like the fire department, the EMS, police, etc. And so again, if one were in theory to want to monitor those monitor those communications, it wouldn't really take much to monitor them because they are not encrypted. Some of them are hidden, some of them are not published. But if anyone is interested, I would look into software-defined radio, which is very easy to use, very easy to understand. It's called SDR for short, and you could record radio, at home. You could place objects in theory in the field that utilize that technology and leave them there, utilizing things like solar and long batteries to exist persistently 24/7, again, to kind of counter the persistent surveillance that we're subjected to as civilians.
Thank you so much. I also have another question for you, since at the beginning I introduced the fact that in these months before our conference, Smart Prison in March, you will develop an artistic project, an artistic production. Could you tell us a bit more what you're planning to do, so we can give a little hint of what is going to happen at the conference later in March? I'm also curious if you will kind of apply the concept of art as evidence that is a perspective that I shared a lot with Laura Poitras back in 2014 when we invited her for a panel here in Berlin. Since you also work with her, curious about your inspiration and also what you're going to develop further.
Yeah, prior to meeting Laura, I definitely thought of the concept as art as evidence, although I wasn't aware of that specific term. I definitely thought of that concept as something that Laura pretty much embodied, and I'm really grateful to have been able to work with her and learn more about how that process actually works for her. And I think what was really interesting about our VCBC collaboration was that we combined this concept of art as evidence with the idea of working with grassroots organizations, because we're both aware that solitary artists and solitary journalists are not going to close these facilities. You know, no journalist on their own, no artist on their own is really going to have any impact whatsoever. And so partnering that idea, that concept of art as evidence with grassroots community organizers who are really doing the most work to close these facilities is like the augmented version of art as evidence, which I happen to be like following now. And as far as the artistic production, I think it's important to state that there's such limited scholarship on this facility and on this concept of floating prisons. So whether it's a prison ship, a prison hulk, a slave ship, a deportation ship, all of those terms I shared, there is very little scholarship on all of those subjects. And I find that very difficult, but it's also very exciting. And so I hope to be sharing a lot of what I've been finding by way of looking at the archives of the shipbuilders who made the Vernon C. Bain Center, because the city doesn't keep any archives on it, which is very convenient for them. They can distance themselves from the creation and the maintenance, you know, of this facility. But the shipbuilders' archives show everything you want to see. They show the financial records, they show the communications, they show the conceptualization process, they show like how they're proud of the facility, how the Department of Corrections in the city of New York was very proud about these facilities, no matter what they might say now. And so I'm taking all of that archival material, which has never been made, you know, available to the wider public, from these shipbuilders' archives, and hoping to make something with that material.
Okay, thank you so much. And Fiamma, then I would like to ask a couple of questions also to you. I would be curious of the consequences that your project generated in terms of public debate, and also which kind of feedback did you get?
Well, for the Guantanamo project, the artist that really was behind all of this Iana Lapo, presented it and showed it as a collective show in many museums, included Berkeley, for example, and at one point, I mean, was threatened to be taken down, but is still there, and is also in the Google map, as we saw in one of the images. So it's interesting because it's like it existed in some way, no? So it's, I mean, that was the purpose. The purpose was to make it look as a real space, even if it was just a symbolic intervention. For the project Perugatti, there has been exhibited in many spaces, and my hope is that we can maybe show it when the prison is going to become a cultural center there. I would really like that. And but the idea is not, for me, the idea is, I think that in this sense, Sean is more on the actual activist point of view. Mine is more on the, if you want, symbolic artistic one. So probably less powerful in terms of actual intervention, but
no, but they're all important.
As powerful. Absolutely, exactly. That's what I was saying. But as powerful in terms of imagination. No? So for me, the imagination component is the one that hopefully can move also the actual one. And at the same time, it's probably Sean and Aubrey's, and from the actual to the imagination. So I think it goes back and forth. In this sense, I think it's good to be together here and present at the same time.
Yes, and also connected to that, so you will also be at our conference in March, and there specifically you will deal with the discourse of borders. That is also a concept you worked a lot with, especially in geopolitical terms. So I would like to ask you to elaborate a bit on that, connected with your field work between Tijuana and San Diego. If you can just give us a little hint of what is your specific research you work on, briefly, considering also that I'm checking, we have a lot of questions from our audience, actually. So then I will then ask you the question of them.
So nothing. I've been working on borders for 20 years, and I've been working at the beginning on metaphorical borders, so identity especially, with a special focus on Mexico. I've always been working as an anthropologist in Mexico. And then from there, I started working on the geopolitical borders between Mexico and the United States. So Tijuana was my base. And with, as you can imagine, a million of crossing per year. So I made work on there. And I lived in Tijuana for 6 years. So I spent a lot of time there. And there I moved to an interest in interdisciplinary borders. So exactly where I'm at now. So working between art and anthropology. So that's my specificity. And at the conference, I hope to show a video that I made on the border, which is about the wall between Mexico and the United States and its history, basically.
Perfect. So now we have really a lot of questions. I'm trying to understand how to combine them. Thank you actually to our audience for this. We could go on for another hour, but unfortunately we don't have time. So I also, tell the people, come to our conference, ask more questions there. But so let's start with Sean. I'm trying to combine some of them. There is actually a lot of interest in the prison itself and also the condition of the people. So, for example, combining three questions, somebody asked, why is it method of imprisoning people considered more effective? And did anyone ever escape from this facility? And another question that I find very interesting that we could combine is there any idea if it could be considered a form of torture to be held in a facility that moves?
I would like to answer the last one first, and then I'll go back to the second one. People have escaped from all of these facilities. Also, recently, someone escaped from Vernon C. Bain. They've almost always been caught immediately after, but yeah, many people have escaped from the facilities over the years. The DOC, the Department of Corrections, again, just doesn't like stories about that, so they kind of push them down. The last questions, can you just restate it one more time so I'd be sure I understand it correctly? It was about human rights abuses and can't these...
Yes, there was a question on if this method of imprisoning people is considered more effective.
Could be considered torture.
And also if the fact that the people are in a facility that moves is considered a form of torture.
So yeah, what's interesting to note is that all of the detainees in these facilities historically have been pretrial, which means they haven't gone to court yet. They haven't been sentenced. So while you might look at these images and think that these people have do deserve to be on these facilities because of their architecture, their distance from land, they're very brutal looking, you think surely these people have done something really bad, but that's not the case. They're mostly misdemeanor charges, and they're all pretrial for the most part. So whether you fall asleep in your car and you've had like too much to drink and you're just like asleep in your car on the street, or you jump the metro without paying, like these are all things that if you do not have money to pay bail will wind you up in these facilities. This will put you in these facilities. So it's not just for like bad guys, so to speak, or bad women, so to speak. As far as the fact that the facility sways and moves and how that can be considered like a human rights abuse, I'm not too sure. However, these facilities are very vulnerable to flooding, and Hurricane Sandy, which was a hurricane that hit New York in 2012, did untold damage to New York City and a lot of its infrastructure. And the city has really done nothing by way of securing this facility from climate change and rising water levels. So if you think about all of these inmates who are locked in cells during a superstorm event, the facility could take on water, the facility could essentially sink, although it would take quite a long time. But I'm sure, that's that to me, detaining people on water when we haven't addressed climate change, especially in the South Bronx, is egregious and definitely a human rights abuse, human rights crime, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Then there is another question for you. Then I pass it to Fiamma. If you can just answer briefly, did you get into any trouble for having released the interception that we heard in the video?
Oh, is this for me? Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No trouble whatsoever. Laura and I, we worked with sources on this project and have not revealed those sources. There was a journalism project, so no trouble.
Okay, thank you. Then Fiamma, are you aware of other cases of museum prisons in the world? Could you suggest any that we could find in books or movies on space transformations?
Alcatraz. That's the first example that comes to mind. A space that today has been restructured and is preserved, and is if you visit it, it really is impacting. You see really how they would live, and how a space can become a witness of what it was, a witness of itself, let's say, no? So for me, the most important value in preserving these prisons is obviously memory, and is obviously the possibility not just of remembering how terrible they were, but how they can be closed and inverted in sense, no? And that's the power of the imagination, the power of transforming that we have to, which is not just imprisoning people, but also transforming places that have been really a place of suffering.
Yeah, actually,
at this moment, I don't.
Yes.
Tell me.
No, I say specifically about Alcatraz. I just visited last month, actually, and so I really suggest people to go, because not only you visit the museum that is downstairs, but then there is a wonderful audio guide that you can go through the whole prison. So I totally relate with that advice, because I think for sure that is an example that is good to give. But sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, so you were concluding?
No, you didn't. Alcatraz, you visit if you can visit if you go to San Francisco, and it's really very close to San Francisco. You take a boat and you go there, and there has been an important moment in the history of Alcatraz, because at one moment Native Americans took over and sort of created an autonomous space. So it has a really interesting story. So, I mean, if I have to think about another place now, I would think about that one.
Mm-hmm. And so there is a question to bots, but I will direct it to you, Fiamma. How are you working to move beyond symbolic art towards political action? Then, of course, Sean, if you also want to answer to that, happy to hear. But did you ever think about this, Fiamma?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, though the symbolic is not, as we were saying before, no, is not so separated from the political action. So for me, the political can be approached directly through a certain active activism, or indirectly through a passive activism, which is more on the level of creativity, which doesn't make it less political or less interventionist, paradoxically. Then on my private life, I was, of course, participate to sit-in and manifestation as much as I want to, but in my work, in my artwork, and my anthropological work, there is always an implied politics.
Mm-hmm. Sean, do you want to add something?
Sure. Yeah. My main problem with art has always been that, for me personally, I feel like I'm hitting walls or ceilings, so to speak, and that it is often, even, no matter what your intentions are and what methodologies you're using, that it is symbolic. And I'm trying to study at the moment and get a degree. I've never studied before, and move directly towards public policy and environmental policy, and get engaged directly in the kind of work that I care about, because art for me is limiting. So whoever asked that, I feel you and I understand the question. But again, my idea goes back to working with grassroots organizations. A lot of the information that Laura and I captured, I would say all of the information that Laura and I captured, was given to the grassroots organization that was organizing against these facilities. So all of the radio transcripts, names of the officers that were speaking in those videos, personal information, like many things were handed over to that grassroots organization, and then they can utilize that in the way that they see fit. So I see it as augmenting their practice, but only if they're accepting us and they'll have us and they need us. I put emphasis on that. Like, they didn't need anything that we were doing. We asked to be in their space. So I think that's how you move beyond working symbolically.
Mm-hmm. And I would just conclude with the last question that came, since I find it also particularly interesting, and then we close here. And this again to Sean. They say the convict ships substituted the slave ships as workforce. How do the authorities explore workforce in the floating dorms?
So the floating dorms, prison barges, and floating detention facilities all contain detainee populations that could be moved off of the facilities, put onto buses, and sent out to do various work. So the Rikers Island jail facility in New York City has a number of prison labor programs, slave labor programs, if you do want to call them that. People use different language, and some of that work is construction. Some of that work is maintenance of the facilities. That's primarily what it is maintenance and the manicuring of these boats, these vessels. And some of it was public cemetery work, which has recently been shut down.
Thank you. And I think I just want to read also a comment of the audience, then we will close here. Somebody say that there is a remark that would like to make, that is important to mention that Guantanamo Bay is occupied Cuban lands, that is the US should not have a right to use, and this is used for torture prisons. And so I think also interesting comparison in a sense to Alcatraz, especially when we mention that this was also occupying an Indian lands. So I wanted to thank you a lot, Sean and Fiamma, for this great presentation, and also thanks to the audience for these really interesting questions that we got. And I want, of course, to remind that we will invite both of you at our conference in March, the last weekend of March, that will be called Smart Prisons, and will be the continuation of this discourse, but of course expanded, since we will have 3 days to explore all this. So please, people, if you are listening and you are not in Berlin, book also your tickets and come. We will be in Berlin at the Kunstquartier Bethanien, but we will be at the same time also online. So in that sense, more environmental friendly for people that don't want to take a plane. But before this conference in March, we have our conference in November. So I also want to mention that is very important. Will be curated by my colleague Elena Velianowska. The title is Madness, Fighting for Justice in Mental Health. Will be November 25th to 27 this year in Berlin, and also on streaming. And we want to answer to 3 specific important questions. What does it mean to have a just mental health care system, and who has access to it? Who decides who is labeled as mad? And also, can we decolonize psychiatry? And in this conference, we will also analyze the fights against profit-oriented healthcare management, and also the stigmatization of those that are affected. also check our website. There is already the program out. You can get more information there on disruptionlab.org/madness. And finally, I also want to remind again that we published a book last year that is still very actual. It's called Whistleblowing for Change. You can get it both on print copy, but also on EPUB, so you can also download it easily from our website. And is a contribution of 20 people, among which whistleblowers, investigative journalists, artists, activists, human rights advocates, to discuss about the discourse of whistleblowing and how whistleblowing is able to create political and social change. So please also read this book, and we will meet online again also on December 2nd. We will have a second Disruptive Friday as part of this series that will bring to the conference that we will have in March, Smart Prisons. And in that specific Disruptive Friday, we will focalize on migration, technology, and also human rights. So see you online the 2nd of December. And thank you again, Sean and Fiamma, for your great presentation, and see you at the conference. And also good luck with your investigation, Sean. We are very curious to see what you will do. Thank you.